But there's 130 million kids who have never once set foot inside a classroom. And it's understanding these issues. So we at the organization fundamentally believe that we want to free kids from the idea that they're powerless here in North America to affect positive change, but also free kids in the developing world so they have a chance to receive an education and break the cycle of poverty. So yes, we built over 650 schools, and we have 55,000 kids that attend a Free the Children school in 8 target countries in which we work when we actually implement our projects. And the schools are fantastic and the programs are great, but you guys know how important education is. But I want to take you on a journey. When we were young, especially when we started the organization many, many years ago, we started building schools. And we built a school, and we built our schools, and we built our schools, and we said, you know what, that's the solution. We need to just build schools. Education is the solution. Kofi Annan has said education is probably peace building by another name. Stephen Lewis has spoken about education is the solution to everything, and don't get me wrong, they're right. But in order for education to actually be effective, we had a challenge. We were building our schools, and we soon realized that the number one reason why girls, at least, can't go to school in sub-Saharan Africa isn't because there's no schools. It's because they have to get water for their villages, something that you guys know very well. So it's great to have schools, but unless you have water programs, girls aren't going to school. So that's why we needed to make sure every single one of our schools had water programs. So the girls would come with their jerry cans. They would go to school all day. We would trap them, get them an education, and then send them home with clean water. And because we were so young, we had to ask these questions, and the elders told us this. But then we had boys and girls going to school, but we also had a problem, especially when it was time of malaria or typhoid, or there was an outbreak of cholera or whatever it might be. Of course, the kids, as a result, weren't going to school, so we needed to make sure that all the schools had health care. So every one of our schools had health care and water and great education. But then we had a further challenge. People were becoming dependent on us. People were becoming dependent on our generosity, the generosity of the young people who are actually funding these programs. So as a result, what we needed to do, and I'm sure, again, you guys know this very closely, is to empower the people of the community, especially the women, so that can actually afford to send their kids themselves. They actually can afford to take on the responsibility and opportunity to run these projects. They actually can afford the 2 cents to fill up their water jug and the $2 that they can actually pay, and they have enough economic independence to do that when their kids are sick. And we know that when we empower a woman, we empower an entire family. And that's what we call Adopt a Village. And it's been very, very successful. But what I really want to talk to you about today is actually the second half of what we do, the second half of our mission, that mission of empowering young people here in Canada to find their voice, something that's very close to all of us. Whether you're an Interact member, a Me2We member, doesn't matter. We're all here for the same reason. We work with about 1.75 million Canadian kids now. We have 131 school boards that implement the programs. About 100,000 young people a year, now a little more, take part in something called We Day. And what we do is we start them really young. We start them in senior kindergarten because we fundamentally believe that you don't turn 18 and develop a social conscience. If you are a parent, especially if somebody who's a young person in your life, start engaging them from a young age. This is so important. If you're a grandparent, start engaging them. Tell them about your work, what you're doing. Have an opportunity to engage them in an age-appropriate way. But then throughout middle school and throughout high school. And it's fundamentally possible for these kids to take the most amazing actions that will literally blow your mind. One of the actions that we do for something, as an example, is something called We Are Silent. Every year on Free the Children's birthday on April 18th or on April 19th, depending on what day it falls, we have the opportunity to have 150,000 young people from across Canada, 150,000 of them, be silent for 24 hours. That's no phone, no talking, no Facebook, no Twitter, no talking, silence for 24 hours in solidarity for kids around the world who have no voice, and a campaign incredibly popular among parents. We also engage them in something called We Scare Hunger. On Halloween, we ask them to go trick-or-treat, not for candies, but for non-perishable canned goods to give to their local food bank. Last year, kids trick-or-treating, not for candy bars, they trick-or-treat for things like Kraft Dinner and peanut butter and so forth. Trick-or-treating, these kids collected over 1 million pounds of food, the single largest one-day collection for food banks in Canadian history by kids trick-or-treating. The reason I share this with you, it's amazing what happens when you engage these kids in an appropriate way and you unleash them. And you unleash them to create massive social change. So what I wanted to do today, and what I've asked and speak to you about is, now that I've shared with you a little bit about the organization and why I'm so proud to represent this incredible award today on behalf of myself and my brother, but a little bit about some of the best practices that we've learned, with great humility, some kernels of wisdom, on engaging the next generation of young people. And this could apply to you as a father, a mother, a grandparent, maybe for those of you who work with your Interact clubs. And some of the stuff may apply, some of the stuff may not, but nevertheless, here's what we've learned along the way. Number one, how do we do this? Well, we've had a chance to spend some time with some amazing leaders in our day, perhaps, at least for myself and my brother, no more amazing than His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And we've spent a lot of time with him. And Craig's even spent some time with him. He stayed at his house in Dharamsala in India. It's been an incredible guiding relationship. And every time he's in Canada, he does some speaking events with us. And last time he was in Canada, we were backstage before he went on something called a Wee Day, which I'll talk to you about a little later. And we were backstage together. And we had about 5 minutes backstage. And it's incredibly nerve-wracking having 5 minutes in an informal setting with His Holiness, because you're not exactly sure what to talk to him about. Like, how do you engage in proper conversation? Like, you don't really make small talk. Like, you need to do something relatively intelligent and sound relatively intelligent. So I tried, and I said, Your Holiness, how do you really, really know that one person can make a difference? And he stopped, and he looked down, and he thought, and he said, Mark, if you think something small can't make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. I'm like, that's why you're the Dalai Lama. You're so cool. And then I said, okay, Your Holiness, all right. So how do you do this? He said, well, this is a problem. He said, we've taught our kids so much here in terms of reading, writing, and arithmetic. We programmed them here, and we have forgotten to program them here. Something he called 3 C's, courage, compassion, and community. And I'm going to walk you through what this means and why this is actually so applicable. So we spent, after that amazing opportunity, this was about 2 years ago, we spent the last 2 years researching and writing a book. And I'm not here to sell you a book. I actually want to tell you what it actually says. But we did 1,000 interviews with parents, grandparents, early childhood development experts, teachers, individuals, to really understand how do you create pro-social behavior in young people? How do you create the next generation of Rotarians, citizens, engaged young people? However we're going to call it, doesn't really matter. How do you do this? Well, we found a couple things. And I'm going to go through them relatively quickly. They're all on our website. We can send them to you, et cetera, et cetera. But we have to make it cool to care. We're going to talk about that. Perhaps the most important equation that we've ever learned, gift plus issue equals change. We're going to talk about that too. Calling a minga. You may not know what a minga is, but we'll have a chance to share with you a pretty cool story. Gaining perspectives through hands-on experience, and having courage. And these are all wedded in incredible data. I'm very much data-driven. I love spreadsheets. All the studies are there, but nevertheless, this is more of the illustrative 30,000-foot journey that we're on together. So making it cool to care. 17 years ago, when we started Free the Children, the 2 uncoolest things you could do as a high school student was 1, take part in glee clubs, and 2, change the world. You were socially ostracized if you did any of those. 17 years later, the 2 coolest things you can do as a high school student is take part in glee clubs and change the world. It's amazing to see how these cycles come back. The reason I share this is when I was young and getting involved and I was in high school, I went up to my friends, and they were usually guys, and I would say, let's change the world, let's do this together. And I was subsequently and regularly shoved into lockers. We need to make sure it is super cool to care. And the young people here today, you guys aren't only awesome leaders, but you're super cool because you are setting the trends. And what is not cool anymore, and what has to be not cool, is apathy. You can use peer pressure, for those of you who are parents, in a positive and a negative way. You can help influence these things. So what we did is we started something called Wee Day. We wanted to make it cool to care. We wanted to make changing the world the coolest thing you could do. Because as a young person, you wanted to make sure you were supported and realizing you're not alone. So we take 20,000 kids from 1,000 schools. We do about now 14 of these a year, all across the country and also in the United States and England. So we take 20,000 kids per venue, and we bring the greatest speakers of our time, and we make sure that the kids realize that the coolest thing to do in the world is to get involved. The coolest thing to do in the world is to find an issue. The coolest thing you could do is make your voice count. One thing I'm going to ask you and to encourage you to do is go support their crazy ideas. And they might say, oh my goodness, we can't do that. No, let them do it. Let them come up with those crazy, crazy, crazy ideas to change the world. Support them, encourage them. Let them be young and fresh and take that energy of what you care about and translate it directly into action. So this is where we have We Days to give you a sense across the country, and it's taken off because young people get it. And yes, it's based on pedagogy, and I can go through all of those of you who are early childhood development experts and teachers and like, well, how does this actually work? But it does. We've had a lot of independent data that shows when young people get engaged in social change in very tangible ways, it increases their educational attainments and global citizenship. And I can talk more about that if anybody's interested. But every school that participates in service campaigns, lesson plans, action kits, online resources. The largest Facebook cause in the world. It actually now has about 3.4 million kids on the Facebook site. And now hundreds of support staff that help these kids become mentors. The reason I wanted to share all this with you is because when we move the needle, whether it be through Me to We or Free the Children activities or through your activities, it's amazing to see. What we've been able to see is 79% of teachers engaged in the program have a renewed sense of purpose as an educator. Or kids involved in the programming for more than 4 years, deemed alumni. Through independent data, shows that 80% of them volunteered last year. 83% made a financial contribution to a charity of their choice, and my personal favorite, kids who are now 18 of voting age, 79% of them voted in the last election. So when you can get kids to vote, you can get kids to care. And it's all about citizenship. We're here because citizenship is so important. Local citizenship and global citizenship. And that's very much what Rotary talks about. That's what, in a sense, you guys are, and that's what we want to do and create. So make it cool to care. Go back to your interact groups, give them tons of high fives and high tens, and say, let's come up with some crazy ideas to change the world. Challenge number 1. Challenge number 2, having an opportunity to really help mentor and move these issues forward. My mom's a great teacher, and she's taught us a lot, informally and formally, but perhaps no more important than an equation. The equation is this: gift plus issue equals better world. You might say, Mark, what does this mean? Well, you're all moms, dads, grandparents, grandmothers, fathers, whatever it might be. What you need to do, if you want to develop pro-social behavior in your young people, is help them realize that they are gifted. Every young person has a gift. They may not be academically gifted, or they might be, but every young person has a gift. They might be a great listener. They might be somebody who's great with technology. They might be great with sports. Help them identify and nurture that gift and combine it with an issue that they care about. And every young person has an issue, I promise you, that they care about. And that's how you create a better world. So if a young boy's gift is hockey and the issue is homelessness, hockey tournament for homelessness. It's literally that easy. Young people often say, I don't know what to do. If you can use this equation, especially for young people who are in grades 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, you will see a remarkable difference. I promise you. Have a conversation this evening or when you're back to your local Rotary chapters or you're back home and actually engage your young people in this conversation and you will see a remarkable result. Often, young people say, I didn't actually know I was gifted. I didn't even know I had a gift, so make sure you help nurture that. But 2, you put those together, you actually create tangible results. Now, my mother, again, being the great teacher that she is, she helped us realize this from a young age, and she helped nurture it from a young age. Now, my mom taught kids with learning disabilities, as I mentioned. Now, when my mom taught kids with learning disabilities, she used to call the kids in the school that she taught, the kids with learning disabilities, she used to call them the gifted kids. It would drive the rest of the teachers crazy, but she did it. She said they just weren't academically gifted. They were gifted in other ways. She said it was my job to help them identify their gifts. We grew up in Thornhill. So not too far from here, but we used to come downtown. That was a big deal for us. When we came downtown, we used to see things that we would never see in Thornhill, including homeless people. And I'll never forget, every time we came downtown, it was like a ritual. My mom would take us out, and she would walk by a homeless person. Instead of grabbing us and making us change the side of the street, as long as they seemed, emotionally stable, she would walk up to them, and she would crouch down, and she would open up her purse and look for a few dollars. And we would have a conversation. She said, was it cold last night? Or why did you end up on the street? Or what is your name? And it was only years, many, many years later, that when we were writing that book, that we realized that we had a conversation with my mom. And I said, Mom, when we were young, and we used to go downtown and used to help those homeless people. And she stopped, and she said, Mark, Craig, well, of course I was helping them. I gave them a few dollars. But what I was actually doing is I was trying to help you. From a very young age, what my mom did is she humanized poverty. So poverty wasn't some crazy thing you see just halfway around the world. Poverty was Mary, who was beaten up by her abusive husband, who ended up on the street, who we had met last week. And all of a sudden, that clicked. And it clicked because when Craig read that article at the age of 12, he had a sense of meaning and deep empathy for that young person. And if you can develop a language around empathy and feelings and engagement around empathy of the young people in your lives, you can be effective. Mary Gordon does amazing work through the roots of empathy in many of our schools, but this whole concept around empathy is so important. That's also part of friendship and peers and engagement as well. So we need to make it cool to care. We talked about number 1. Number 2 is gift plus issue equals better world, helping every young person in your life realize they're gifted. Number 3 is changing perspectives. And this is what you guys do, and we do this all the time as well. But we take young people overseas, and we do this en masse. This year, we have about 3,000 young people who will travel overseas with us through our Meet a Wee programs to actually go volunteer. 3,000 Canadian kids who are giving up their March break and their summers en masse with their schools or individually to go off and have these experiences. And they come back and their lives are fundamentally changed. And whether it be through us or a Rotarian fellowship or a program, it doesn't matter, but every young person in your life, encourage them. Every Interact member in your community, encourage them at some point in their lives, go overseas. At some point in their lives, get their hands dirty and see the impact and have the chance to meet and build not only community, but build self-confidence. This is how we know it's been a successful trip. This is actually how we, in part, measure our success on these trips. The girls come home, and they fly home typically. They are off for 10 days or 3 weeks or whatever it is. They fly home through London typically, and we're flying in our Canada, whatever it is. And in Terminal 3 at Heathrow, they turn on their smartphones, because that's the only time they can now be connected again, and they go and borrow people's phone cards or whatever it is, and they call up and they make 2 phone calls. And the first phone call the girls typically make is to their parents to say, thank you so much for letting me go. Thank you for the early Christmas money or the Bar Mitzvah money or the Hanukkah money. Thank you for letting me have this experience. Thank you for believing in me. The second phone call the girls typically do en masse is to their boyfriends to dump them. And all these relationships end at Terminal 3 at Heathrow, and they're all together, and like, well, tell them it's not you, it's me, and try this out, and they're all supporting. And I see a few fathers who are like, she's going! We'll talk later, sir. Well, we can talk about this. We'll connect. Don't worry. We'll take care of them. That's okay. But the reason I share this is that their perspectives change. What is cool is not whether Justin Bieber is in or not this week or whatever it is, it's who they are and what they do. And the manifestation of that is dumping their boyfriends. And it's amazing to see these girls come up with a new sense of self-confidence and sense of purpose. So my next challenge for those of you, again, if you're a young person, doesn't matter which organization, doesn't matter. This is not a sense of competition. It's a sense of opportunity. Go volunteer at some point. Encourage your Interact kids to get engaged, to volunteer. Have them see the world. I can assure you this is probably the most important thing you can do as a Rotarian to make sure that Rotary is successful the next 100 years and the 100 years after that. Let young people understand why we're fighting so hard for the world we want to see. Next is calling a minga. So we talked about, again, making it cool to care. We talked about that important equation. We talked about changing perspectives. The next thing I want to do is share with you a story. It's a story that's based here in the Andes Mountains of Ecuador. It's one of the places we work. We build schools all around the world. On my first school building trip with a group of young Canadians, we were building a school up literally in the middle of nowhere in the Andes Mountains, and we had a problem. The problem was this. We had all our supplies going back on the back of mules up these tiny, windy mountain paths, because the only way you could get there, up the back of mules. All our supplies for the building of the school was going up these paths, and it was peak harvest season. So all the food was going back the side of mules, down the opposite direction on those tiny, windy mountain paths. And literally, in the middle of nowhere in the Andes Mountains of Ecuador, there was a traffic jam of mules. Traffic jam of mules. So we had to set our mules down because we didn't want the food to rot, and we didn't know what to do. So we went to the wisest, the eldest woman of the community, the chief. And we said to her, we said, ma'am, we have a problem. We're not going to finish your school. We can't change our plane tickets. We're not sure what to do. She said, no problem. We said, no. Problem, rain. Rain, no roof. Rain. She said, no problem. She said, no problem. And she literally walked out, and out of her hut, there was overlooking a gorge, and she said, tomorrow there will be a minga. And I went, minga, minga. Nobody moved. Nobody flinched. And she walked back. She said, see, no problem. We're like, oh, that was awesome. Thanks so much. That was great, hooking us up with that minga thing. So we went back to the kids, and we're like, she called a minga. We better work all night. So we worked all night. We worked as hard as we could. We were hitting there. We had our lanterns. We did everything we could. We were so ineffective. We hit our thumbs probably more than we hit nails at 3 o'clock in the morning, but at 4 o'clock in the morning, at 5 o'clock in the morning, at 6 o'clock in the morning, we were working and working and working. And what we would see is these mamas, come with kids strapped on their backs, and we'd see these kids all walk, and the papas would all walk, and they all left their fields at peak harvest season, and they all came together, even though they themselves weren't going to benefit from the school. They all came together, and they built the school, they finished the roof, they had a big celebration, and they left. We were totally blown away. They left. And we've never seen anything like this before. And we went to the woman, we had our head bowed, and we said, "Man, what did you do?" She said, "I called a minga." We said, "We know." What's a minga? She said, "Oh, a minga in my language." And catch one, the minga is the coming together of people to work for the benefit of all. We said, "Wow, the coming together of people to work for the benefit of all." She said, "Yes, the coming together of people to work for the benefit of all." She said, "What's the word in English?" And we were a relatively intelligent young group of Canadians. She's like, "What's the word? What's the word?" Because we kept on saying, coming together people to work for the benefit of all. It was getting a little exhaustive. She said, "What's the word?" And we were like, Said, "It's kind of like volunteerism, but not really, because you can do that alone." And we said, "It's kind of like barn raising, but barn raising doesn't really take place in downtown Toronto all that much." And she said, "Okay, so what's the word?" We said, "We got it. It's kind of like a riot for good. Everybody comes and riots for good, and they leave." She said, "Oh, a riot for good." We're like, "Yes, a riot for good. Thank you so much." That was super awkward, because we understand, linguists tell us that words reflect culture. Think of all the words that we have in our language that revolve around the word money. But when we immediately don't have a word for the coming together of people to work for the benefit of all, what does that say? Well, it says we need a lot of work. The reason I want to share this story with you is twofold. Well, one, this is a minga. What you're doing this afternoon, all day today, with the minister, with all of your incredible leadership, what you do every single day, but especially today, is a minga. This is the coming together of people to work for the benefit of all. So I want to congratulate you on that, number one. But number two, the reason I want to share this with you is, in order to move the needle on these issues, in order to get rid of polio, in order to do the things that we need to do with our interact groups, we need to do more of it. So I need you to go back to your Rotary clubs, next day, day after, whenever you're back, and actually call a minga and engage with your interact groups and have them call a mingas as well. Create that sense of purpose and unity and community. Because if you can do that, we can actually move the needle. Ladies and gentlemen, as I end my last piece, you guys have been very, very generous with your time today. My last piece is more philosophical. And again, we've got all the information, all the books. We even have a team out in the side, in the back right there from our Meet a We team. I'm going to put up their hand. Can you guys put up your hand really high? So if you guys want information, just go check them out a little bit later. I'll talk about that more. But we talked about importance of making it cool to care. We talked about this gift plus issue equals change. We talked about changing perspectives. We talked about how we need to build a sense of community and purpose together, how important that is. But in order to do this, we need determination, we need leadership, but probably, most importantly, we need courage. And so this is my last story today. And it's set here in Sierra Leone, a very poor country in West Africa. We work here. I've been here many times. This is called Kono. This is the diamond mines or diamond fields of Sierra Leone. And this is where the war took place, when literally Sierra Leone was, by the UNDP, the worst country in the world in which to live. It was because of the fighting that took place around this piece of land. People in these open pit mines would look for diamonds that would retail here for thousands of dollars. They would be paid a pittance because of how things were structured in terms of their work and their food and so forth, which is another conversation for another day. But nevertheless, in Sierra Leone, when you were there, and some of you I'm sure have probably been there with your work with Rotary, 9 times out of 10 when you would see a burnt-out building, it was actually a burnt-out school. And you see the devastation. But I want to have a chance for you to take a good look at this gentleman. Even in the most challenging of circumstances, I met perhaps one of the most impressive people I've ever met in my entire life. And his name is Santosh. And take a good look at him, because you'll never see his face again. He'll never be given these type of accolades. He'll never win a Nobel Peace Prize, never be on the cover of Time magazine, even though he probably deserves all of that. But take a good look at him, and then I'm going to tell you the story. And the story is this. Santosh was student council president of his school in Kono. And what happened in his school happened in so many other schools. The rebels would come to the village, and the first thing they would do when they would come to the village, it was actually on page 2 of the rebel handbook. The first thing they would do is they would actually go to the schools. The reason they would go to the schools is they would encourage kids as a result to become child soldiers. But how they would do that is as follows. So the rebel commander would come and bring all the school community akin to where we are today together. And they would make all the teachers sit in the side or the corner of the room. And all the teachers would subsequently have to get up. They'd have to go to the back of the school, kneel against the school, facing the school wall, and one by one, on page 3 of the Rebel Handbook, it was told that the rebels would have to, and they would, execute the teachers. The reason teachers en masse in this country were executed because they were wisdom keepers, the most intelligent members of society, and as a result, they would teach kids to stand up against violence, and as a result, they needed to be silenced, and they were. So, when the teacher's no longer there, the rebel commander would come on stage in the auditorium, pretty much akin to where I am today, and grades 5 and up would have to come into the auditorium, and the rebel commander would give this impassioned plea or speech about how we'd have to free Sierra Leone from its diamonds, and then he would give the kids one of two choices. One of two choices, no choice number 3, one of 2. And with great humility, I want to ask you, what choice would you have made? Choice number 1 is to join the rebel army. At which point the kids would come up single file, one by one. They'd come up on stage or wherever it might be. The rebel commander, or one of his henchmen, would take a small razor blade and make a small incision right here near the temple, and the child would start to bleed. And then they would take a mixture of something called brown, a mixture of gunpowder and cocaine in a fine powder-like format, and put it in the child's bloodstream. And it would rub it in so the child would become emotionally unstable, and then forced to go off with a current rebel soldier in front of his house, or most likely his hut. They would gather the entire community, and the child, being psychologically unstable at this point, was handed a gun and forced to shoot either their mother or their father. The reason they would have to shoot either their mother or their father is that way they could never go back to their own family. It was actually a very effective type of psychological warfare. They only had one family left, and it was the rebel family, because they were ostracized. So choice number 1, join the rebel army. Choice number 2, if you didn't want to do that, no problem. You would have to choose to have your right hand amputated. The reason you'd have to choose to have your right hand amputated, very simply, is that way you can never go as part of the government forces. You can never go pull a gun or pull a trigger for government forces, and you were no longer deemed a threat. So Santos heard his 2 choices, and he was sitting, and he was student council president of the school, as mentioned, and he stood up, and he said, "Mr. Rebel Commander, you've unfortunately put me in charge, as I'm student council president, and we no longer have our teachers," and he said, "I'm walking on stage." And he came up the aisle, and he said halfway through, put his hand up, and started moving his fingers. He was shaking, he was so nervous, but he got on stage, and he even got on his tippy toes so everybody, even including the kids, huddled in the back, would see him. And he said, "Mr. Rebel Commander, our village believes in peace. Please leave now." And then he took his hand and he slammed it down as hard as he could on the table in front of everybody. And the rebel commander was so pissed off that this kid would stand up to him. He on purpose took out a dull machete and in front of all the kids asked, did he want short sleeve or long sleeve? Did he want a hand amputated here or here? He was handed his right hand back in his left hand. He put as much force as possible to put his stump above his head and apply as much pressure. And with the help of 2 friends, he started to walk. And he walked, and he walked, and he walked, and he walked the dividing line, just under an hour, the neighboring country called Guinea. And when he reached that dividing line, he fell in the arms of UN soldiers protecting the village. And he was taken to an outpost of Doctors Without Borders. And I met him back because his life was saved, somehow. And I had a conversation with him, with Craig, and we said, Santos, what are you doing now? And he said, I'm going back to school. We said, how are you affording to go back to school? We hadn't found a school in North America to build the $8,500 to build a school overseas for your community. How are you affording to do that? And he said, well, I have my left hand still, and I've taught my left hand to serve as a carpenter, and I make these beautiful wooden statues that I sell to the troops who are now protecting my village, and I'm making enough money to go back to school. And I, of course, was totally blown away. And I said, Santos, having your hand removed willfully in front of everybody must have been the most painful, the most horrific decision of your life. And he immediately stopped and he said, no. He said, no. He said, Mark, just last week, the most painful and the most horrific decision was because of the general amnesty that was called by the United Nations. Just last week, I actually met the guy in the market who had chopped off my hand. The most painful and the most horrific decision, he said, was to put out my hand one more time. This time, again, it was my left hand. And to shake his right hand as a sign of peace. The reason I share that story with you is not to make you feel fat, sad, or guilty or depressed for any of those reasons, for a very important one, is that if we are going to inspire the next generation of Canadians to sit in these seats, to get engaged, to eradicate the next disease on that list, we need that leadership determination, but most importantly, we need courage. You need to do exactly what you're doing and literally that much more, because we all need to do it. It's all of our opportunity, all of our responsibility, and it's a unique opportunity to do so, especially with the young people engaged in your Interact clubs. So go back and engage in meaningful conversation, make it cool to care, and do all of these things, because when you do it, we'll change the world. And the person who taught us that is my very, very last quote I want to end on, words of advice from an amazing educator who we spent some time with before she passed away, and her name was Mother Teresa. Craig and I were a lot shorter back then, a lot younger back then. But we spent the day with her before she, of course, passed away. We were at the Mother House in Calcutta. And when we were young, the coolest thing about meeting Mother Teresa as a young person was she was this tall. She was 4'8". Can you imagine 4'8"? And as we spent the day with her and we were leaving, she grabbed her hands and she had literally hands like sandpaper. And she looked us in the eyes, but she actually looked deeply into our souls. And she said, "Remember, boys, we can do no great things, but we can do small things with great love." So on that note, I just want to say it's been an honor. Let's get rid of polio, and thank you for the great award. Have a good day.
Mark, I gotta share with you that when I told my daughter, who's a teacher teaching grade 6, that I had been asked to thank you today, she went, "Oh, he's my hero." She's a grade 6 teacher. She wanted me to shake your hand. Well, I was sitting here at lunch, and there were a lineup of young girls wanting their picture taken with Mark. Mark, you truly have caught the spirit of what young people are all about, you and your brother Craig. You have shown us today that young people can indeed change the world. As a past District Interact Chair, I can share with you that I don't believe we as Rotarians do enough to identify the power of young people. So I would challenge all Rotarians to take Mark's message back to your clubs. Let's do a better job, because those people, those young people, do want to make a difference. Mark, thank you very much for your message today. Keep up the great work.